Usually when we approach a problem in our lives, we expect a very specific kind of mechanical fix. Like if you have a flat tire, you patch the rubber. Or if you have a headache, you swallow an aspirin.
Right. Yeah. It's a very one-to-one, incredibly direct transaction.
Exactly. You identify a broken part and you just swap it out.
And we love that model, because it's visible, it's clean, and it really appeases our logical brains. I mean, the whole Western worldview is built almost entirely on this mechanistic foundation.
But the moment you step into the realm of human consciousness or, your inner life, that mechanic's toolbox becomes completely useless.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot wrench a feeling of emptiness into submission. You just can't. So today we're attempting a kind of, psychological surgery. We are taking on what might just be the absolute biggest illusion of human life.
Which is the deeply ingrained assumption that you're fundamentally separate from everything around you. Separate from other people, separate from the natural world, separate from meaning, and depending on your foundational beliefs, separate from the divine.
So we're unpacking a massive stack of notes and research today, all centered around the life and the honestly deeply provocative teachings of a 12th century mystic named Ibn Arabi.
Yes.
And specifically, we're exploring his doctrine known as Wahdat Al-Wujud, which translates to the unity of being.
And it's important to understand right up front that Ibn Arabi was not interested in some abstract academic debate about, the geography of the cosmos.
Right. He wasn't doing theoretical astrophysics.
Exactly. He wasn't asking, where's the divine located? He posed this radical, world-tilting question. What if there is nothing but the divine? What if the separation we see everywhere is just a trick of the human lens?
Let's ground this a bit, because if you are listening to this deep dive right now, maybe you're commuting to a job that stresses you out, or you're just folding laundry, and you might wonder why a 12th century philosophical question actually matters to your Tuesday afternoon.
It's a fair question.
It really is. And it matters because if you've ever felt that bone-weary exhaustion of constant comparison, or the burnout of managing your personal brand, or just the endless search for validation, well, this is going to hand you a completely new operational system for reality.
Yeah, and to grasp the gravity of that operational system, we really need to look at the historical friction Ibn Arabi created, because there was a lot of it.
Oh, yeah.
He was born in Andalusia, Muslim Spain, in the year 1165. And he basically spent his life walking across continents, traversing the Islamic world from North Africa to Mecca, and eventually settling in Damascus.
And he studied philosophy, theology, and, human consciousness during a time when the boundaries of empires were fiercely, fiercely defended.
Very true.
And he did all this without a smartphone, without search engines, without motivational influencers telling him to, optimize his morning routine.
With no life hacks.
None. The guy just walked across the known world. And he generated over 800 works while doing it. Now, some people revered him. They called him the greatest master. But the establishment, a lot of people in power considered him exceptionally dangerous.
And the historical record shows exactly why he was such a threat. Wahdat Al-Wujud, this unity of being, it argues that reality is one. It's not fragmented into a billion isolated competing pieces.
Yeah.
So if everything we see is a manifestation of a single reality, the political implications of that are staggering.
Huge. Because it means a peasant sweeping the streets and a monarch sitting on a throne share the exact same ultimate essence.
Exactly. It completely dismantles any claim to inherent superiority. You cannot tell a ruling class that their reality is an illusion without making some serious enemies. I mean, they relied entirely on that illusion of separation to maintain their hierarchy.
Right. I am up here, you are down there. But the philosophical nuance here is really crucial, because our sources clarify that Ibn Arabi wasn't promoting some simplistic pantheism.
No, not at all.
He wasn't pointing at a piece of furniture and saying, that wooden chair is God.
Right. He argued that there is only one ultimate reality, one ultimate source of existence, and everything else exists only through it. Borrowing its reality for a brief moment in time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the source material has this brilliant analogy to explain that borrowing process.
Yeah, the stained glass window.
Yes, I love this. So imagine sunlight hitting a massive, intricate stained glass window in a cathedral. You stand inside, you look up, and humanity is that glass.
Okay.
You see all these different brilliant colors, red glass, blue glass, green glass, and those colors represent our different personalities, our religious labels, our cultural histories, all our individual quirks. From the inside of the room, those differences look entirely real and completely distinct.
And to be clear, the colors absolutely matter. The diversity of human experience is fully acknowledged in his philosophy. The origin of the illumination is shifted entirely.
Right.
The red glass is only visible because light is passing through it. The green glass relies on the exact same light. So the manifestation is diverse, but the essence is totally uniform.
We are all made of the exact same light. But, ma'am, looking at the modern world, it feels incredibly dark, divided, and isolated.
It really does.
If we share this unity of being, why are we arguably more miserable and fragmented than ever?
Well, that paradox basically defines our era. I mean, we are living in the most hyper-connected period in the history of the human species. The technological infrastructure allows for instantaneous global communication.
Right, you can text someone in Tokyo in half a second.
Exactly. Yet the psychological data reveals unprecedented levels of depression, anxiety, and a feeling the sources describe as being spiritually homeless.
Spiritually homeless, wow. That phrase just captures it perfectly. Because the sources point out that modern culture practically trains us from birth to worship separation.
Oh, constantly.
We hyperfixate on my brand, my individual success, my unique trauma, my followers. It's like every structure in society incentivizes us to build a taller and taller wall around our personal identity.
And Ibn Arabi viewed the ego as a mask.
Yeah.
It is a fabricated self.
Yeah.
When that false self is elevated to become the absolute center of your existence, well, it requires constant defense.
Yeah.
You end up living in this fragile, exhausting prison of your own making, constantly scanning the environment for anything that might diminish or attack your curated identity.
Okay, but I'm going to push back here on behalf of everyone listening. Because, wait, don't we need a sense of self?
What do you mean?
I mean, I need my ego so that I look both ways before crossing the street. I can't just blissfully wander into oncoming traffic while contemplating the unity of the cosmos.
That is very true. And it's an important distinction. It is a biological survival mechanism.
Yeah.
The ego helps you navigate physical space,
Yeah.
remember your address, feed your body, all of that. The danger is never the mere existence of the ego.
Yeah.
The danger is mistaking the tool for your entire identity. It becomes a pathology when we believe the ego is the totality of who we are.
And social media amplifies that pathology to a deafening volume today. We're all basically forced to become performing brands, managing the PR firms of our own identity.
Yeah,
We've stopped asking, who am I? And we've started frantically asking, how am I performing?
And managing that PR firm drains our cognitive battery.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially a piece of software running in the background of your brain at all times, consuming massive amounts of energy just to maintain an illusion.
It's exhausting.
It is. Ibn Arabi warned that the more attached you are to the illusion of separateness, the more suffering you inevitably generate. A wave only suffers when it forgets it belongs to the ocean.
A wave only suffers when it forgets it belongs to the ocean. It is wild to hear a 12th century mystic diagnose modern social media burnout so perfectly. I mean, it sounds identical to what psychologists tell burnt-out corporate executives today.
Well, and neuroscience takes it a step further. We can actually observe this philosophical concept inside an fMRI machine now.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When neuroscientists map the brain, they find that the self is not a fixed, solid entity residing in a specific lobe. There's no biological seat of the soul, so to speak.
Right.
The self is an active, fluid process. It is a story the brain is constantly writing and revising. And it's primarily driven by a network called the default mode network.
The default mode network. Okay, that's the part of the brain that lights up when we're daydreaming or worrying about the future or ruminating on a past embarrassment, right? Like the narrator.
Precisely. It is the autobiographical center.
Mm-hmm.
And clinical research on meditation shows that when individuals engage in practices that decrease their sense of separateness, practices that quiet the default mode network, their anxiety metrics just plummet.
Wow.
They report profound increases in compassion and a deep, deep sense of peace.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's like a monk and a neuroscientist walking into a lab and realizing the ego isn't the hardware of the brain, it's just a localized user interface.
Yes, exactly.
And you can actually turn it down or delete the app entirely. They arrived at the exact same conclusion from completely different directions.
And modern psychology uses a specific framework for turning down that interface called cognitive diffusion.
Cognitive diffusion.
Right. It's the learned ability to step back from your thoughts rather than being fully immersed in them. You create a linguistic and spatial gap.
Creating a gap. So instead of my brain screaming, I am a failure, I train myself to say, I am noticing that my brain is producing the thought that I am a failure.
That subtle shift is profound.
Yeah.
You move from being the thought to being the observer of the thought. And Ibn Arabi challenged his students with this exact thing centuries ago.
Oh, he did?
Yes. He asked, who is the I observing those thoughts? Because if you can watch your mind frantically worrying, you cannot purely be the mind. There is an observer underneath the noise.
That is so cool. And even physics is starting to point toward this deeply interconnected reality, though our source material issues a very wise warning here, which is that we shouldn't misuse quantum mechanics to sound mystical.
Oh, definitely.
Because, people love to throw around the word quantum to sell expensive self-help courses.
They really do. The caution is necessary, but the foundational science is unavoidable. Phenomena like quantum entanglement seriously challenge the old classical mechanical worldview.
Right, where the universe was just a collection of separate billiard balls bouncing off each other in empty space.
Exactly. But entanglement shows us that two particles can interact instantaneously, even if they are light years apart. Measuring the spin of one particle immediately determines the spin of its entangled partner.
And Einstein hated it.
He really did.
He called it spooky action at a distance because it violates the whole idea that nothing travels faster than light.
It violates the concept of space and separation altogether. It suggests that at a fundamental subatomic level, the universe is a single undivided fabric. The separation we observe is just a macroscopic illusion.
Okay, so we have the ancient wisdom, we have the psychological mechanisms, and the quantum mechanics all aligning.
Yeah.
But, and this is a big but, philosophy without practice is just a nice quote on a coffee mug. The actual friction of daily life requires way more than theory. If you're listening to this and you're dealing with a massive deadline or a difficult boss, how do you operationalize the unity of being?
Well, the sources distill Ibn Arabi's vast works into a deeply practical 5-step framework designed to dismantle the ego's dominance.
Perfect. Let's go through them. Step 1 is observe the ego. This taps right back into that cognitive diffusion we talked about.
Yeah.
You have to notice the machinery of division before you can dismantle it. So you just start paying attention to how often your mind creates labels. Notice when the narrator starts aggressively categorizing reality into me versus them, or superior versus inferior, or success versus failure.
And the mere act of observation disrupts the automatic nature of the ego. Once you observe that mental noise, you create a gap. And that gap demands to be filled, which brings us to step 2. Practice presence.
Because the ego cannot survive in the present moment. It feeds exclusively on the regrets of the past and the anxieties of the future.
Exactly. You starve the ego by anchoring your attention in the immediate sensory environment. You interrupt the narrative loop with physical reality.
Like focused breathing, mindful walking, things like that.
Yes. Or simply listening to a colleague without mentally drafting your response while they're talking. That physically powers down the default mode network we discussed earlier. You aren't escaping reality. You are finally showing up for it without the heavy filter of your judgments.
And once you strip away that filter, you're left staring at the people actually in front of you. Which naturally leads to step 3. See the divine in people.
Yes.
Ibn Arabi taught that every human reflects ultimate reality in unique ways. So that stranger who cut you off in traffic, they're connected to you.
And this is where the practice faces its ultimate test.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very easy to see unity in a beautiful sunset.
Oh, for sure.
It is incredibly difficult to see it in a person you fundamentally disagree with or find actively toxic.
Wait, I have to pause here because this is so relevant. Does seeing the divine in a toxic, malicious person mean I'm just supposed to smile, tolerate their abuse, and dissolve my boundaries for the sake of, spiritual unity?
No. The source material is unequivocal on this. Absolutely not.
Oh, good.
Seeing the unity of being is not a mandate to become a doormat. Boundaries are actually an expression of clarity. You can set a firm, immovable boundary with someone to stop harmful behavior while simultaneously recognizing that their toxic actions are driven by their own deep illusions and pain.
That distinction is a massive relief because you depersonalize the attack. You see, they are just trapped in a very tight ego loop, thrashing around. You can protect yourself from a drowning person without hating the drowning poster.
Precisely. Compassion becomes an accessible mechanism rather than a forced moral chore. You see beyond the superficial label they are projecting. And doing this consistently naturally shifts how you view yourself, moving us to step 4. Stop worshiping identity.
Identity worship is basically the religion of the modern world. We confuse our tools for our essence, your job title, your trauma history, your political affiliation, your follower count. None of these are you. They're just the stained glass window.
Think of identity like a highly specialized spacesuit.
Okay.
You need the suit to step outside, breathe the atmosphere of society, and interact with the physical world. It is highly functional. But the pathology begins when you refuse to take the suit off. When you get back inside, you forget there is an astronaut underneath all that heavy gear.
That's a great way to put it. And if identity is just a spacesuit, step 5 is taking it off. Step 5 is seek direct experience. Across all mystical traditions, Sufism, Zen Buddhism, contemplative Christianity, Advaita Vedanta, the consensus is that the map is not the territory.
Right. You cannot simply agree with this deep dive on an intellectual level and expect your life to change.
You actually have to do it.
You have to walk the terrain yourself, sit in silence, create the space for contemplation. The realization of your profound interconnectedness only rewires your nervous system when it moves from a concept in your head to a lived bodily experience.
Because if we spend our entire lives violently defending our spacesuits, chasing these fragmented, heavily branded identities, we will always feel lost and perpetually exhausted.
And this reveals the ultimate paradox of Ibn Arabi's philosophy. The ego equates surrender with annihilation. It is terrified of letting go.
Of course it is.
The sources share a famous Sufi metaphor that perfectly illustrates this fear. A tiny drop of water is trembling on the edge of the vast ocean. It resists falling in, crying out, "If I enter the ocean, I will lose myself. I will disappear."
And the ocean looks at the trembling drop and replies, "No, you will become vast."
The ego believes that if it stops fighting to be special and separate, it will die. The truth of Wahdat Al-Wujud is that when you surrender that tiny, isolated self, you don't disappear. You inherit the universe. You remember your original vastness.
We are constantly trying to solve a crisis of deep disconnection with shallow productivity hacks. We assume if we just optimize our morning routines or achieve the next promotion, that haunting feeling of emptiness will vanish. But you cannot cure an internal crisis of separation with external achievements.
No, you can't. We haven't lost our intelligence. I mean, we built artificial intelligence, split the atom, and mapped the human genome. What we have lost is our memory of the ocean.
Our brilliant source author makes a phenomenal joke about this, actually. If humanity actually woke up tomorrow and remembered this intrinsic connection, if the illusion of separation vanished globally, half the arguments on the internet would evaporate overnight.
Though, the author notes, the other half of the internet would still argue eternally about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Certain debates might survive even total spiritual enlightenment.
Hey, we still need something to argue about in the comment sections.
Very true.
But the staggering truth beneath the humor is that healing does not begin when you finally perfect your isolated island of an identity. Healing begins the exact moment you remember the ocean.
And as we bring this deep dive to a close, we really want to leave you with a concrete exercise to test this philosophy in your own life. We discussed how your constructed identity, your title, your history, your anxieties, is essentially a heavy coat you wear to survive the social climate.
Yeah, it keeps you warm, it's useful, but it isn't you.
So what would happen if you consciously decided to take that heavy coat off for just 1 hour today?
Just 1 hour.
If you stopped performing, stopped defending your opinions, and stopped guarding your separateness, who is the vast, quiet presence left standing underneath?
That is the psychological surgery waiting for you. To realize you were never broken because you were never truly separate. Keep questioning your reality, and we hope you enjoy the vastness of the ocean.